Welcome back. In today's video we are going to be seeing how to manage keys in Django. So the keys in questions are those settings that are bound to vary from time to time. For instance, if you think of database credentials, if you think of email configurations, so there are particular variables that requires to be set up probably when changing the production environment or whenever some other settings changes. So we have a dedicated way of managing those keys in Django where we use a .env file for that purpose. Let us see how to implement that in Django. So what we need to do is that we need to install a dependency. I'll be copying and pasting it here. Let me first of all stop this and I'll be pasting it there. Alright, so in less than a minute we have it. Then let me run that server again. So in here we need to import something. We need to import let me show you. We need to talk of from that we need to import config. Alright, so I have basically set autosave. That's why as I type we get syntax error and it terminates that connection. So I'll restart my server again. Alright, so once we do that, we need to create a file here. Need to create a file. Let me name it should be .env. So by naming it .env, then we are able to read those configurations. Right. So one of the settings that we can put in place, we can probably talk of debug. Here, and we set it to currently set to true. We can have it there. Then let me see some other settings that we can include here. Right, so probably the database connection. Alright, so let me see. Alright, I think that's what I need here. Let me come do this. Alright, so probably what I need to do is that I can mention db name. Then we have Django DB. Then we can have DB user. Then we can have Django user. Then we can have DB password. We have user pass. Then we have DB port. We have that 306. And finally we have DB host. We have localhost. Alright, so we can do away with this. So the way to consume these settings here is that we need to talk of, for instance, if we come here to the name. Okay, let me save this for future use. Rather, let me just copy, comment it out, then add it here again, so that can replace this. So in here I just need to mention config, then I need to pass in the name that I gave the database name here. So in there we have DB name. Let's do that to user as well. So we need to mention config, then DB user. Then in here we need to mention config, DB password. Alright, so basically we are updating these are the names that we have assigned the various values to here. All right, so let's see if that works for us. Right, so let's again try to access our. All right, and we see that we are able to access that. But then there are some things that we need to keep in mind, as our project may fail to work at some point based on the way we have passed in these values. So one of the things that we need to keep an eye on is that we have the port, which has been passed as basically the port is an integer. All right, so in a scenario whereby search fails to work, we need to explicitly pass in the port as an integer. So in this case, let me just have a comma, then I talk of cast, then I talk of int. Right, so let me see if that works for us. Perfect. So in this case we don't get an error, but there are some scenarios that you get an error for just passing it as a string. Then the other thing that we need to pay attention on are boolean values. So in here, all right, so in here, for instance, we needed to pass in config, then pass in we want to pass in debug. All right, I believe that should work, should not give us errors. All right, so then debug is another value that we need to appreciate, that this is a boolean data type, so we also need to cast it to a boolean. Should be bool. So basically that's it. So for now we may not get that error here, but I believe there are some scenarios that you encounter some errors because it's not able to tell what that value is. So you need to explicitly tell it that whatever value that we are passing here is a boolean, is an integer. I believe it treats everything as strings, so that's why some of these special values you need to explicitly mention what they mean. The other thing that we may mention is probably the allowed host, because again this one we are expecting to receive a number of values. So we may have something like www.domain.com. We can also have domain.com based on whatever values that you have. For the host, once you pass in your list of host there, then in the settings we have config. Then what we need to mention here is allowed host. Then maybe we can talk of the default. We can talk of the default being empty. Then once we pass in that, we need to split that. Split, then pass in something like that. Right, so this will take care of the list that you add here. And I think that's it. So for the email configuration, which is another thing that you can move into the .env, I think everything plays around what we have mentioned in terms of we have the email port, we also have the email username, password, the host, and everything. So you can use what we have done for the database, the debug, and the allowed host to work on any other section that requires to fetch their configuration from the .env file. For instance, let me just mess up with one of the values here and see if at all we are able to establish that connection. And we see that that connection cannot be established because we have messed up with the database configuration here. So it's very healthy to have a .env file, as you only need to access this file and identify the value that you need to change, instead of navigating through your code trying to search for that section or that line that you need to update. Right, so Let me restart this, and we see that our connection has been re-established. So in a production environment, should you make such a change and it doesn't reflect, you just need to restart the web server that you are using. And that's it. I believe this video is helpful. If you confirm that, please give it a thumbs up, drop your thoughts in the comment section, and ensure to subscribe to this YouTube channel.